You are watching the Dark Fantastic Network.
When it was first published in 1897, Dracula, by Bram Stoker, didn't exactly set the world on fire. Upon release, it was met with unremarkable sales and dismissive reviews. But, slowly, over the ensuing decades, Dracula became the world's most famous horror novel, and Count Dracula became literature's most famous villain, with countless film and stage adaptations of the original novel. But it was around the 1970s that, for better or worse, many critics started to reevaluate the novel through a postmodernist lens. This, in turn, resulted in the story taking on wholly different meanings, most of them revolving around sexuality. In Elizabeth Miller's brilliant essay, Coitus Interruptus, Sex, Bram Stoker, and Dracula, Miller writes, readers of Dracula have been assured repeatedly that the novel is all about sex. Indeed, every sexual practice, fantasy and fear imaginable has been thrust upon its pages. Furthermore, critics comb every aspect of Stoker's life looking for evidence for their particular brand of psychosexual analysis, sometimes even inventing facts to support flimsy theories. And Miller is right, as, since the 1970s, the majority of critics and literary scholars have forcefully reinterpreted the novel through Freudian and Jungian lenses, and have obsessively focused on the sexual aspects of Dracula. For example, in his 1959 essay, The Psychoanalysis of Ghost Stories, Maurice Richardson notes that the novel provides really striking confirmation of the Freudian interpretation. In fact, Richardson alleges that the story does not make sense unless it is viewed through a Freudian lens. Even Stephen King, the world's most successful writer of horror fiction, and a true populist thinker, couldn't resist adding his 2 cents to the discussion, writing in his nonfiction book, Danse Macabre, that Stoker revitalized the vampire legend largely by writing a novel which fairly pants with sexual energy, and that the sexual basis of Dracula is an infantile oralism coupled with a strong interest in necrophilia. And Stoker biographer, David J. Skal, calls Dracula the sexual fever dream of a middle-class Victorian man, a frightened dialogue between demonism and desire. In her essay, Miller asks why the almost obsessive preoccupation with sexuality that has pervaded interpretations of Dracula since the mid-20th century, adding that, writer Gabriel Ronay once likened Dracula to a weather vane indicating the direction of the prevalent social winds. From the pop psychology of the 1960s through the AIDS-anxious 1990s, sexual readings of Dracula owe as much to the tenor of the reader's times as they do to the original text. Dracula, as envisioned by Stoker in the original novel, is anything but sexy. He is described as tall, thin, with peculiarly arched nostrils, massive eyebrows, a fixed and rather cruel-looking mouth, extremely pointed ears, red eyes, coarse hands with broad fingers, and hairs growing in his palms. It was with the production of Horror of Dracula, Hammer Studios' first adaptation of the novel in 1958, that Dracula was presented as a terrifying but sexually virile Dark Lord, whose bite and embrace liberated Victorian women from their sexual repression, with director Terence Fisher saying that, in his 1958 film version, Dracula has the power, in a twisted way, to make Lucy and Mina, 2 main characters from the novel, give a sexual reaction. During production, Fisher told actress Melissa Sturbeling, who played Mina, "Listen, you should imagine you have had one whale of a sexual night, the one of your whole sexual experience. Give me that in your face." The trend of romanticizing and sexualizing Dracula became more and more apparent as the decades wore on, culminating in Francis Ford Coppola's lush adaptation, misleadingly titled Bram Stoker's Dracula, in which the Count is portrayed as an attractive and damned lover, forbearing a cruel eternity as he searches for his lost love, a concept that was never present in Stoker's original novel. But as writer Robert Mile has suggested, Dracula is a horror story about vampires, and Lucy is a vampire who is being destroyed according to the method prescribed by folklore. According to Miller, given the Christian framework of the novel, which most contemporary critics choose to overlook, what is happening in the infamous staking of Lucy scene, in which Lucy's lover, Quincy, drives a stake through her heart to end her torment, may be no more than the salvation of Lucy's immortal soul brought about by the destruction of the demonic power that controls her vampiric self, an act that has nothing Freudian or psychosexual about it at all. So maybe it is time to put all the overwrought reinterpretations of Dracula back in the coffin, and place the story back where it belongs, in the hands of readers, to be enjoyed the way it was probably intended all along, as a riveting and terrifying tale of good versus evil. As Elizabeth Miller writes in her insightful essay, imagine a Dracula in which wooden stakes are wooden stakes, and blood is merely blood.